Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and
We are playing the scariest game of all creation.
It's a game that I feel like I don't even have to explain anymore because every single person on the planet is playing this game right now.
Five Nights at Freddy's.
Five Nights at Freddy's!
Five Nights at Freddy!
welcome back to Five Nights at Freddy's.
One of the most prevalent horror games in internet culture, spanning from graphic novels to not-so-graphic movies. Five Nights at Freddy's is an iconic piece of horror game media with an interesting history. Just a real quick disclaimer, I'm not going to be diving very deep into the lore of the games per se, but if you want to learn more about the lore, I think Matt Pat's got you covered. Now onto the history of Five Nights at Freddy's. The Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, or FNAF for short, all stems from an indie horror game created by Scott Cawthon, released on August 8, 2014. Within the game, you work as a night guard working the night shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where you must conserve power to survive 5 increasingly difficult nights while haunted animatronic characters try to come and kill you. These animatronics being the iconic cast of characters we know as Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Foxy the Pirate, and Chica the Chicken, who is also accompanied by this cupcake, who the fans dubbed Carl. The first game also features our first appearance of a very mysterious Golden Freddy. While it might be somewhat obvious that the game's original design was inspired by companies like Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza, these did not directly inspire the game's original creation. The game's creator, Scott Cawthon, had actually been making lots of little games and animations prior to his creation of Five Nights at Freddy's, with some of them being religious-based. One of his games, however, was not religious-based and was actually a simple resource management game called Chipper & Sons Lumber Company. While originally intending to be fun and family-friendly, it was criticized for the animal characters looking too creepy and scary. So that inspired Scott to make an intentionally scary game, Five Nights at Freddy's. After the first installment and popularity boom of Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott was quick to release Five Nights at Freddy's 2 in November of the same year. The second game uses the same point-and-click design as the first. However, it takes place in a new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. This features a new office design, as well as toy and withered variants of the original cast, along with new characters like Balloon Boy and the Puppet. FNAF 2 is also the first game to feature mini-games after the character dies, which provides more insight into the story of FNAF. The following year, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was released in March of 2015, this time featuring only one animatronic named Springtrap, an animatronic that houses the dead body of William Afton, the murderous antagonist of the series. Springtrap hunts down the players inside of a horror-themed attraction called Fazbear's Fright. While Springtrap is the only animatronic in this game that can kill the player, the other animatronics can still appear as phantoms that will jump scare the player and make them more vulnerable to Springtrap. Following FNAF 3, Scott released Five Nights at Freddy's 4. This game was the first in the series to feature the player as a child rather than a night guard, which meant they had no access to security cameras. Instead, the player has to rely on audio cues and use a flashlight to fend off the nightmare animatronics from within their bedroom. The game also features mini-games between the levels that offer more insight into FNAF's story, similar to the second and third game. Now, despite FNAF 4 being advertised as the final chapter, Five Nights at Freddy's sister location was released as the 5th installment of the main game series in 2016. As you might expect, Five Nights at Freddy's sister location takes place at a sister location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza called Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, where the player plays as another night guard. While FNAF 4 allowed some movement, Sister Location is the first game in the FNAF series to allow the player to move from room to room to complete a series of different tasks each night. Then in 2017 and 2018, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator and Ultimate Custom Night released as freeware. In Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the player must attempt to run a successful pizzeria while at the same time trying to fend off from animatronics during the day rather than during the usual nighttime. Now, similarly to the other Night 7 and the other games, Ultimate Custom Night gives the players complete control over the animatronics difficulty, and it features 50 animatronics from the previous games. For the first time in 2019, the FNAF franchise received its first virtual reality game called Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted. While Scott originally intended for it to be a remake of just the first game, it ended up expanding to covering all 5 games, as well as having additional mini-games and collectibles for the player to collect. Later on, the game received a non-VR update and a DLC called Curse of Dreadbear featuring Dreadbear and Grim Foxy. Then in 2021, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach released, featuring the game series' first free roam game, where the player plays as a kid named Gregory who's trapped inside the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. Within this new FNAF experience, we meet multiple new animatronics, such as the daycare attendant, Montgomery Gator, and Roxanne Wolf, as well as glam rock versions of both Freddy and Chica. And perhaps most notably of this game, Glam Rock Freddy actually assists the player in trying to escape, rather than acting as an antagonist. Additionally, while the player has to try and avoid the other animatronics per usual, they must also try and avoid the security guard, Vanessa. Later in 2023, a second installment of the VR FNAF Help Wanted game was released, titled Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2, featuring 40 playable levels within the game that vary in difficulty. Help Wanted 2 has the player going through multiple different tasks within the Pizzaplex that was featured in Security Breach, as well as featuring more collectibles and mini-games, just like Help Wanted 1. Also, just like the first game, Help Wanted 2 received a non-VR update later in the year. Finally, in 2025, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic was released as the 11th and most recent installment of the FNAF series. Secret of the Mimic is another first-person style stealth horror game, similar to Security Breach, as the player tries to traverse a 3D environment, solving puzzles and trying to escape animatronic attacks. The game follows Arnold, a Fazbear entertainment technician tasked with retrieving company property from Murray's Costume Manor while being guided by Dispatch, the owner of this company being named Edwin, who made the Mimic. But unfortunately, something went so wrong. Now the player must survive being pursued by the Mimic, a violent endoskeleton that can take the form of any animatronic. Also, similarly to the other games, Secret of the Mimic offers multiple different game endings. While these 11 games reflect the main series of the FNAF franchise, other spin-off games include FNAF World, a role-playing and turn-based battling game, Five Nights at Freddy's AR Special Delivery, an augmented reality game, Freddy in Space 2 and 3, a side-scrolling shooter game, Security Breach Fury's Rage, a side-scrolling combat game, Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit, a role-playing adventure game based off the Fazbear Frights anthology, Five Laps at Freddy's, a kart racing game, and Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Crew, a Roblox co-op game. Now, it should certainly be noted that the fan base is a huge part of the FNAF franchise. So huge, in fact, that Scott Cawthon created the Fazbear Fanverse initiative to fund and publish FNAF games, including the One Night at Flumpty's series, the Five Night at Candy's series, the Pop Goes series, and the Joy of Creation. It would also be criminal not to mention the iconic fan-made FNAF songs like the Living Tombstones' Five Nights at Freddy's, It's Been So Long, Die in a Fire, as well as other great songs made by notable artists like JT Music and Try Hard Ninja. Finally, other notable FNAF media includes the print publications like the Five Nights at Freddy's trilogy from 2015 to 2018, as well as short story anthologies like the Fazbear Frights collection or the Tales from the Pizzaplex collection, which have all been adapted into graphic novels. Now, Scott Cawthon was of course a writer for all of these FNAF publications, including other things like interactive novels, guidebooks, and whatever other miscellaneous FNAF media there is out there, from 2019 to 2025. He also is a screenwriter and producer for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie that came out in 2023 and will be again for the second film alongside director Emma Tammy. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is set to release on December 5th, 2025, this year, with Josh Hutcherson, Elizabeth Lail, and Matthew Lillard set to reprise their roles as Mike Schmidt the Night Guard, Vanessa, and William Afton, respectively. But that just about wraps up the history of Five Nights at Freddy's. I wish I could have dove deeper into the FNAF lore, but then this video would have been 10 times longer and released 10 months later if I had, so I think I'll just stick with my history overviews. Oh yeah, but I did find out this really interesting thing online I haven't seen anyone talking about, but it like totally changes the lore. Basically, I was looking into Golden Freddy and Springtrap, right? And